Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories today. I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story asterisk. The crystal chandelier above the mahogany conference table cast dancing shadows across the faces of four men who had known each other since their university days. Julian Westwood swirled the amber liquid in his glass, barely listening as his friends debated the merits of their latest business acquisitions. The conversation had grown tiresome, as it often did during these Friday evening gatherings at his downtown penthouse. "I'm telling you, the property market in the coastal region is about to explode," Benjamin Carter insisted, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who believed his opinion mattered more than most. Anyone with sense should be investing there now. Julian glanced toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Somewhere 20 floors below, people were finishing their workdays, heading home to families and lives that didn't revolve around stock portfolios and investment strategies. He wondered when his own life had become so predictable and empty despite all the wealth he had accumulated. "You're not even paying attention," Thomas Brennan accused, snapping his fingers in front of Julian's face. "What's gotten into you lately? You've been distracted for weeks." Before Julian could respond, the door to his study opened quietly. Emma Rodriguez entered with a silver tray bearing fresh glasses and a new bottle of whiskey. She moved with efficient grace, her movements practiced from 3 years of working in the Westwood household. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her simple uniform did nothing to hide the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. "Thank you, Emma," Julian said, his tone polite but distant. As it always was with the household staff, she nodded silently and turned to leave. But not before Benjamin's voice stopped her. "Wait a moment," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Julian, isn't this the maid you were telling us about? The one who rearranged your entire library without asking?" Julian felt a flush of embarrassment. He had mentioned the incident to his friends in passing, complaining about how Emma had taken it upon herself to reorganize his books by subject and author rather than the random system he had been using. What he hadn't told them was that her system was actually far superior and that he had been secretly impressed by her knowledge of literature. "That would be me." "Sir," Emma replied calmly, meeting Benjamin's gaze without flinching, "I apologize if the new arrangement doesn't suit your preferences. I can restore the original order if you wish." "Oh, no, Julian said quickly. "The new system is fine. Better than fine, actually." The third friend, Daniel Morrison, leaned back in his chair with an amused expression. "She certainly seems confident for household help. Tell me, do you always take such liberties with your employer's possessions?" Emma's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I take pride in my work, sir. Mr. Westwood has an impressive collection, and it deserved to be properly organized so the books could be easily found and appreciated." "Appreciated," Benjamin repeated with a laugh. "Listen to her talk. You'd think she actually reads those dusty old books instead of just cleaning around them." "I do read them, actually," Emma said, her composure never wavering despite the condescension in his tone. "Mr. Westwood has first editions of several classic novels that are quite remarkable. The annotations in his copy of Pride and Prejudice suggest it once belonged to a literary scholar." Julian felt something shift inside him. He had never noticed those annotations, had never even opened that particular book. Yet his maid, someone he barely acknowledged beyond basic pleasantries, had not only read it but understood its historical significance. Thomas laughed loudly. "Well, isn't she just full of surprises? Julian, where did you find this one?" "She's certainly not your typical cleaning lady. I found the position through an employment agency 3 years ago," Emma answered before Julian could speak. "Now, if you gentlemen will excuse me, I have other duties to attend to." She left the room with her head held high, and for a moment, silence fell over the group. Then Benjamin started laughing. "Did you see how she looked at us? Like we were beneath her, not the other way around. Someone should teach that girl her place. She was perfectly respectful," Julian found himself saying, surprising himself with the defensive tone in his voice. "Oh, come on," Daniel chimed in. "She was putting on airs, acting like she's our equal. It's amusing, really. She probably went home to her tiny apartment and told her friend she had a conversation with the great Julian Westwood and his associates. I doubt she's that impressed by us," Julian muttered. This sparked an idea in Benjamin's mind, and his eyes lit up with mischief. "Actually, this gives me a brilliant idea. Julian, You know your annual charity gala is coming up in 2 weeks, right? That exclusive event where everyone who's anyone in the city shows up. What about it? Julian asked warily. I'll bet you 50,000 that you don't have the courage to invite your maid to attend as your guest, Benjamin declared. Slapping the table for emphasis, the other two men immediately perked up with interest. Thomas grinned widely. Now this could be entertaining. Can you imagine her showing up in some department store dress, completely out of her depth among the elite? That's cruel, Julian protested, though without much conviction. Is it though? Daniel argued. You'd be giving her an opportunity most people in her position would never have. A chance to see how the other half lives. Besides, she seems so confident and well-read. Let's see if she can actually handle herself in that environment. Benjamin leaned forward, sensing victory. Come on, Julian. When have you ever backed down from a challenge? 50,000 says you won't invite her, and another 50,000 says that even if you do, she won't accept. And if by some miracle she does accept and actually shows up, I'll add another 100,000 that she'll be completely out of place within the first hour. Julian felt torn between his better judgment and his pride. These betting games had been part of their friendship for years, though they had never involved another person quite so directly. Yet something about the challenge intrigued him. Emma had shown more intelligence and composure in 5 minutes than most of the people who would attend his gala displayed in an entire evening. Fine, he heard himself saying. 200,000 total? I'll invite her. She'll accept, and she'll hold her own better than half the guests who'll be there. The men shook hands, sealing the wager, and began discussing the terms in more detail. But as the evening wore on and his friends eventually left, Julian sat alone in his study, wondering what he had just agreed to. The bet had seemed simple enough in the moment, but now he questioned his motivations. Was he doing this to prove his friends wrong, or was there something else driving him? The truth was, Emma had intrigued him from the day she started working in his home. Unlike the previous staff members, who had been either overly deferential or quietly resentful, she treated her work with genuine care and showed an interest. In his belongings that went beyond mere duty, he had noticed other things too, though he had never allowed himself to dwell on them. The way she sometimes hummed softly while working, old melodies that spoke of a musical background. The careful way she handled his grandmother's antique vases, as if she understood their value beyond their price. The notes she left when something needed repair. Written in elegant handwriting that suggested education beyond what her current position might indicate, Julian poured himself another drink and stared out at the city lights. Tomorrow he would extend the invitation, and then he would see what Emma Rodriguez was really made of. He told himself it was just about winning the bet, but deep down, a part of him hoped she would surprise them all. The next morning, Julian found Emma in the library, carefully dusting the shelves with the same attention to detail she brought to everything. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the thousands of books that lined the walls. She didn't notice him at first, and he took a moment to observe her. She was reading the spine of a leather-bound volume, her lips moving slightly as if savoring the title. Emma, he said, clearing his throat. Do you have a moment? She turned, startled, and immediately set down her cleaning supplies. Of course, Mr. Westwood. Is something wrong? Has my work been unsatisfactory? No, nothing like that, he assured her, suddenly feeling awkward about what he was about to propose. Actually, I have an unusual request. My annual charity gala is in 2 weeks, and I'd like to invite you to attend as my guest. Emma's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. I'm sorry, sir. Did you say as your guest? Not to work the event? As a guest, Julian confirmed. It's a formal affair, black tie. The city's prominent citizens will be there, along with various business associates and philanthropists. I thought you might find it interesting. He watched as a range of emotions crossed her face, confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been hurt. Emma was far more perceptive than his friends gave her credit for, and he could see her trying to work out the real reason behind this invitation. Mr. Westwood, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure it would be appropriate, she said carefully. I'm your employee, and there's a certain boundary that should probably be maintained. I understand your hesitation, Julian replied, and he meant it, but I'd like you to consider it anyway. You've worked for me for 3 years, and I've come to respect your intelligence and character. You deserve an evening of fine dining and culture as much as anyone else will be there." Emma studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for hidden motives. "Is this some kind of social experiment, sir? Because I should tell you that I don't appreciate being made into anyone's amusing project." Her directness caught him off guard, and Julian felt a rush of guilt. She had seen right through to the truth, or at least close enough to make him uncomfortable. "You're right to be suspicious," he admitted. "The invitation did start as part of a conversation with my friends, but that doesn't make it insincere. I'd genuinely like you to be there." "To prove something to your friends," Emma concluded, crossing her arms. "Let me guess. They bet you that I couldn't fit in with your crowd. That I'd embarrass myself, and, by extension, you." Julian couldn't meet her eyes. The accuracy of her assessment stung more than he expected. "Something like that," he confessed quietly. To his surprise, Emma laughed, though there was little humor in the sound. "At least you're honest about it. Most people would have made up some elaborate story." She paused, considering. "If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I will, what exactly would you expect from me?" "Just be yourself," Julian said. "Show them that intelligence and grace aren't limited to people born into wealth." Emma shook her head slowly. "You're asking me to be a representative for everyone in my position, to prove that we're just as good as the privileged elite. That's a heavy burden to place on someone's shoulders for an evening's entertainment." "You're right," Julian admitted, feeling ashamed. "I'm sorry. This was a terrible idea. Please forget I mentioned it." He turned to leave, but Emma's voice stopped him. "Wait," she said. "I didn't say no. I just want to understand what I'm getting into." She took a deep breath. "I'll accept your invitation, Mr. Westwood, but on one condition. Win or lose your bet, I want you to donate double the amount to the literacy program at the community center where I volunteer on weekends." Julian turned back, impressed by her negotiation. "That's your condition? Not a new wardrobe or a bonus?" "I have a dress I've been saving for a special occasion," Emma replied, "and I don't need your money. But those kids need books and tutors, and if my attendance at your party can help them, then I'll do it." Done. Julian agreed immediately, extending his hand. Emma shook it firmly, her grip confident and sure. As their hands touched, Julian felt an unexpected jolt of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just attraction, though. He had to admit she was beautiful in a natural, understated way. It was recognition, a sense that he was finally seeing her as a complete person rather than just the woman who kept his house running smoothly. "I should warn you," Emma said as she released his hand. "I may be a maid, but I won't pretend to be something I'm not. If your friends expect me to be intimidated or grateful, they're going to be disappointed." Julian smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "I'm counting on it." The 2 weeks before the gala passed in a strange blur of anticipation and anxiety for both Julian and Emma. Julian found himself thinking about the upcoming event far more than he should have, wondering how Emma would present herself and whether his friends would keep their word about the donation, regardless of the outcome. He caught himself watching her more carefully as she worked, noticing details he had overlooked for 3 years. Emma, for her part, maintained her professional demeanor, but Julian sensed a shift in the air between them. Their brief conversations became slightly longer, touching on subjects beyond household matters. She mentioned the book she was currently reading, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, and he found himself genuinely interested in her. Thoughts about leadership and social responsibility. On the morning of the gala, Julian left the penthouse early for a series of meetings, leaving Emma to complete her usual duties. What he didn't know was that she had plans of her own. Emma had called her closest friend, Diana Chen, who worked as a stylist for a prestigious fashion magazine. Over the years, Emma had helped Diana through difficult times. And now Diana was determined to return the favor. "You're going to walk into that gala and leave everyone speechless," Diana declared as she arrived at Emma's modest apartment with 2 large garment bags and a professional makeup kit. "Not because you're trying to be someone you're not, but because they're finally going to see who you really are." Emma sat in her small living room, surrounded by the books and photographs that told the story of her life. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico when she was 5 years old, working multiple jobs to ensure she could attend good schools. She had earned a scholarship to university, studying literature and art history. But her father's sudden illness during her final year had forced her to leave school and find immediate employment to help with medical bills. The maid position at Julian's penthouse had been meant as temporary. But 3 years had somehow slipped by. She had told herself she would return to finish her degree, but life had a way of making plans complicated. Her father had recovered, but by then, her mother needed support, and the cycle continued. "I still don't know why I agreed to this," Emma said, watching Diana unzip the first garment bag. "It feels like I'm participating in my own humiliation." "You're doing it for the literacy program," Diana reminded her. "And maybe, just maybe, you're doing it to prove to yourself that you belong anywhere you choose to be." The dress Diana revealed took Emma's breath away. It was a deep emerald green that would complement her olive skin tone perfectly, the elegant lines that were sophisticated without being overly flashy. The fabric shimmered subtly in the light, suggesting quality without screaming for attention. "Diana, this must have cost a fortune." "I can't accept this," Emma protested. "It's a loan from the magazine's fashion closet," Diana explained. "One of the designers owed me a favor. Now stop arguing and let's get you ready. We have 4 hours to transform you from Cinderella to the woman who outshines everyone at the ball." As Diana worked her magic with makeup and hair, Emma felt herself transforming. Her dark hair, usually confined to a practical bun, was styled in soft waves that cascaded over her shoulders. The makeup was subtle but effective, enhancing her natural features rather than masking them. When she finally slipped into the dress and looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. "That's not a transformation," Diana said softly, standing beside her. "That's just you without the uniform and the walls you put up to get through each day. That's Emma Rodriguez, as she was meant to be seen." Meanwhile, across the city, Julian was putting on his tailored tuxedo and wondering what the evening would bring. His friends had been messaging him all day, making jokes about the entertainment that awaited them. Benjamin had even started a betting pool among other guests about how long Emma would last before making some social mistake. Julian felt increasingly disgusted with himself for setting this in motion. What had seemed like harmless fun now felt cruel and exploitative. He had even considered calling Emma to cancel, to tell her she didn't need to go through with this, but something stopped him. He remembered the steel in her eyes when she had accepted the invitation, the way she had turned his thoughtless bet into an opportunity to help others. She deserved the chance to prove herself, not for his sake or his friends, but for her own. The gala was being held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with old-world elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city skyline. As guests began to arrive in their designer gowns and expensive tuxedos, Julian stood near the entrance, greeting people with practiced charm while his mind remained elsewhere. Benjamin. Thomas and Daniel found him within the first half hour, drinks already in hand and grins on their faces. "So, where's your special guest?" Benjamin asked with barely contained amusement. "Did she chicken out at the last minute?" "The evening is young," Julian replied coolly. "Emma said she would be here, and I believe her." "Oh, this is going to be priceless," Thomas said, scanning the crowd. "I almost feel bad for her. Almost." Julian was about to respond when the buzz of conversation near the entrance suddenly shifted. Heads began to turn, and a wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. He turned to see what had captured everyone's attention, and his breath caught in his throat. Emma stood in the doorway, poised and radiant in the emerald dress that seemed to have been created specifically for her. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, and her makeup was flawless without being overdone. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that commanded attention. It was the way she carried herself with quiet confidence and natural grace that needed no apology or explanation. She scanned the room calmly, and when her eyes found Julian's, she smiled slightly and began walking toward him. The crowd seemed to part instinctively, giving her a clear path. Julian was vaguely aware of his friend's shocked silence beside him, but his focus remained entirely on Emma. "Good evening, Mr. Westwood," she said when she reached him, her voice warm and steady. "Thank you for inviting me." Julian realized he had been staring and quickly recovered his composure. "Emma, you look absolutely stunning. I'm glad you could make it." Wouldn't miss it, she replied, her eyes twinkling with amusement. She turned to his friends, who were still gaping at her transformation. Good evening, gentlemen. I believe we've met before, though under somewhat different circumstances. Benjamin was the first to recover, though his usual smugness had been replaced by genuine surprise. Miss Rodriguez, I hardly recognized you. You look quite different from when we last saw you. Funny how a uniform can limit people's perceptions, Emma observed pleasantly. But I assure you, I'm the same person who served you whiskey 2 weeks ago. Before anyone could respond, a distinguished older woman approached their group. Margaret Thornton was one of the city's most respected philanthropists, known for her sharp wit and her ability to spot pretension from across a room. Julian, dear, aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely companion? I don't believe I've seen her at these events before. Mrs. Thornton. This is Emma Rodriguez, Julian said, grateful for the interruption. Emma, Margaret Thornton, is the founder of the Children's Arts Foundation. Emma's face lit up with genuine interest. Mrs. Thornton, what an honor. I've read about your work providing music and art education to underprivileged children. The article in last month's Arts Review was particularly inspiring. Margaret's eyebrows rose with pleasant surprise. You read Arts Review? How refreshing. Most people at these events can barely tell me what's in the newspaper headlines. Tell me, what did you think of the piece about community-based arts programs? For the next 10 minutes, Julian watched in amazement as Emma engaged in a thoughtful discussion about arts education, urban development, and the importance of creative expression for young people. She spoke with knowledge and passion, referencing specific programs and statistics, while also sharing observations from her volunteer work at the UHS. Community Center. Margaret was clearly delighted, and before she moved on to greet other guests, she touched Emma's arm warmly. My dear, you must come visit the foundation. We need more people with your insight and genuine commitment. Julian, you've been hiding this treasure from us? Shame on you. As Margaret walked away, Benjamin looked like he had been struck by lightning. How did she know all that? He muttered to Thomas. I thought she was just a maid. She is just a maid, Daniel replied, though his tone had lost its earlier mockery. But apparently she's also a human being with interests and intelligence. Who knew? Emma heard the comment and turned to face them directly. Actually, gentlemen, I prefer to think of myself as a person first, with a job that happens to involve cleaning. Just as you're all people first, who happen to work in business and finance. The difference is that society values your labor differently than mine, but that doesn't make my work less important or me less worthy of respect. The directness of her statement created an uncomfortable silence. Julian felt a surge of admiration mixed with guilt. She was right, of course. She had just articulated something that he had never quite put into words himself. Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. I suppose we owe you an apology, Miss Rodriguez. We may have been somewhat dismissive when we first met, somewhat, Emma repeated with a slight smile. That's a diplomatic way of putting it, but I appreciate the acknowledgement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see the appetizers are being served, and I'm quite hungry. She walked away with her head held high, leaving the 4 men staring after her. Benjamin shook his head slowly. I think we may have made a terrible mistake. You think? Julian said sharply. This whole thing was a terrible mistake from the beginning. Betting on whether another human being could measure up to our arbitrary standards of worthiness. Throughout the evening, Julian kept a discreet eye on Emma as she moved through the crowd. To his continued amazement, she seemed completely at ease. She joined conversations naturally, contributed thoughtful insights, and even made people laugh with her quick wit. Several guests sought her out specifically after hearing her speak, wanting to know more about her perspectives on various topics. At one point, Julian found himself standing next to her by the windows overlooking the city. You're full of surprises, he said quietly. Emma turned to him with a knowing smile. Am I? Or did you just never bother to ask who I was beyond the person who cleaned your home? The question hit harder than any accusation could have. You're right, Julian admitted. I've been incredibly blind and thoughtless. For 3 years you've been working in my home. And I never once considered that you might have a whole life, dreams, interests, passions that had nothing to do with your job. Most people don't, Emma said, her voice softening. We live in a world where we define each other by what we do for work, rather than who we are as people. You're not unique in that regard. though perhaps you should hold yourself to a higher standard." Before Julian could respond, the master of ceremonies announced that dinner would be served shortly and requested that everyone find their assigned seats. Julian had deliberately seated Emma at his table, along with Margaret Thornton and several other thoughtful, accomplished individuals he respected. During dinner, Emma continued to impress everyone with her conversation. She discussed literature with a retired professor, debated urban planning with a city council member, and shared touching stories about the children she tutored at the community center. Julian found himself seeing his social circle through new eyes, noticing which of his acquaintances were genuinely interested in Emma as a person, and which ones were simply being polite. His 3 friends, seated at a nearby table, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evening progressed. It was becoming painfully obvious that Emma was not only holding her own but exceeding expectations in every way. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove anything. She was simply being herself. That authenticity was more powerful than any performance could have been. As dessert was being served, Benjamin approached Julian with a chastened expression. "I need to talk to you about the bet," he said quietly. "What about it?" Julian asked, though he already knew what was coming. "It's off," Benjamin declared. "We were wrong, completely and utterly wrong. Your friend or employee, or whatever you want to call her, she's extraordinary. And we were jerks for thinking otherwise." Julian looked at his old friend and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "Thank you for saying that, but you should be telling Emma, not me." "I will," Benjamin promised. "But first, I want you to know that we're going to honor the donation anyway. Double what we bet going to that literacy program she mentioned. It's the least we can do." As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Julian found Emma standing alone on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. He joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Quite an evening," she said, without looking at him. "You were magnificent," Julian replied honestly. "Thank you for doing this." "I didn't do it for you," Emma reminded him gently. "I did it for the kids at the center who need books and hope. But I'll admit there was a small part of me that wanted to prove something. Not to your friends, but to myself." "And did you?" Julian asked. Emma finally turned to face him, and in the soft light from the ballroom he saw a mixture of emotions in her eyes. "Yes and no. I proved that I can hold my own in any environment, that my worth isn't determined by my job title or bank account. But I also realized something else tonight." "What's that?" "That I've been hiding," Emma said quietly. "I've been using the maid position as a shield, telling myself it's temporary while letting years slip by. Tonight reminded me that I have more to offer the world, and I owe it to myself and to my parents' sacrifices to pursue that potential." Julian felt a sinking sensation in his chest. "Are you saying you're going to quit?" "Yes," Emma replied firmly. "I'll give you 2 weeks to find a replacement, but then I'm going back to university to finish my degree. I'm going to become the person I was meant to be before life got complicated." "I'll miss having you around," Julian said, and he meant it more than she could know. Emma smiled. "Will you miss me? Or will you miss having someone who keeps your life organized and your books properly shelved?" "Both," Julian admitted, "but mostly the former. Tonight showed me what a fool I've been. You've been right there in my home for 3 years and I never saw you." "Not really. And now you do?" Emma asked, her tone gentle but skeptical. "Now I do," Julian confirmed, "and I'm realizing what I'm about to lose." The morning after the gala, Julian woke with an unfamiliar feeling in his chest. It took him several minutes to identify it as regret mixed with determination. The penthouse felt different somehow, as though Emma's absence was already palpable despite her not having officially left yet. He made coffee in his pristine kitchen, a space that Emma had maintained with such care, and realized how little he actually knew about the mechanics of his own home. Emma arrived at her usual time, carrying herself with the same quiet professionalism she always had. But something had shifted. Julian noticed it immediately. She moved through her duties with efficiency, but there was a lightness to her step that hadn't been there before, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Good morning," Julian said, intercepting her in the hallway. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "Of course, Mr. Westwood," she replied, setting down her supplies. "Please call me Julian," he said. "I think we're past formalities at this point." Emma studied him for a moment before nodding. All right, Julian. What did you want to discuss? Everything, he blurted out, then laughed at himself. I'm sorry that came out wrong. I wanted to talk about last night, about your decision to leave, and about what happens next. They settled in his study, the same room where the ill-fated bet had been made 2 weeks earlier. Julian poured them both coffee and sat across from Emma. Seeing her fully for perhaps the first time since she had started working for him. First, I want to apologize again for the bet and for treating you as less than a complete person for so long, Julian began. There's no excuse for it. Apology accepted, Emma said simply. But Julian, you need to understand something. You weren't uniquely terrible. You were just typically thoughtless. Most people treat service workers as invisible or interchangeable. You at least were never rude or demeaning. You were just absent, which in some ways is worse because it's so casual. Her words stung precisely because they were true. I want to do better, he said. Not just with future employees, but in general. Last night, watching you shine in that room full of supposedly important people, I realized that I've been living a very small life, despite all my wealth and privilege. Emma tilted her head, genuinely curious now. What do you mean? I mean that I go through the motions of being successful without ever asking what success actually means. Julian explained, the thoughts crystallizing as he spoke. I attend galas and business dinners. I make profitable investments. I surround myself with people who confirm my worldview. But what am I actually contributing? What difference am I making? That's a question only you can answer, Emma said softly. But I will say this. You have resources that most people will never have. The question is whether you'll use them to insulate yourself from the world or to engage with it meaningfully. They talked for over an hour, the longest genuine conversation they had ever had. Emma told him about her family, her interrupted education, her dreams of working in arts education or museum curation. She spoke about the kids she tutored, the joy she found in watching them discover the power of reading, the frustration she felt at how underfunded their programs were. Julian, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He talked about the pressure of family expectations, the loneliness of wealth, the way success had become hollow when it wasn't connected to any greater purpose. He admitted that he had been coasting for years, making money because that was what he knew how to do, but feeling increasingly empty despite his achievements. So what are you going to do about it? Emma asked directly. The question hung in the air between them. I don't know yet, Julian admitted, but I know I want to be different. To do better? Maybe you could help me figure out how. Emma shook her head gently. That's not my job, Julian. It was never my job to fix you or save you from your own emptiness. You need to figure out who you want to be and then become that person through your own efforts. You're right, he acknowledged. But could I at least ask for your advice sometimes? As a friend? A friend, Emma repeated, testing the word. Is that what we are now? I'd like us to be, Julian said honestly. If you're willing. Emma smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. I think I'd like that too. But let's be clear about boundaries. I work for you for 2 more weeks, and during that time, our relationship remains professional. After that, if friendship develops naturally, then good. But I won't be your project or your redemption story. Fair enough, Julian agreed, extending his hand. Emma shook it, and this time, the gesture felt like the beginning of something genuine rather than a transaction, true to her word. Emma maintained professional boundaries for her remaining 2 weeks. She trained her replacement, a pleasant woman named Rita, who Julian suspected would never organize his books quite the same way. Meanwhile, Julian found himself making changes in his life that surprised even him. He started volunteering at the community center where Emma tutored, initially just observing but gradually taking on a small reading group of his own. The kids were suspicious of him at first, this wealthy stranger invading their space. But his genuine interest in Emma's vouching for him eventually won them over.